What's up, everybody? Casey Cooper here, coming to you with another Drumeo lesson. And today I'm going to talk about how to set up a drum set. And now this could be something for beginners, or this could be something that can make intermediate or even advanced drummers think a little bit. It's something that I'm constantly working on and adjusting, and really there is no one size fits all. This isn't going to be your perfect drum setup, and I'm not coming at it trying to tell you that it is. But what I am going to tell you guys is a little bit about what I think when I'm setting up my drum set, why I do things the way I do. I get tons of questions about where my hi-hats are and my double pedals and the way that I set up things. And so today I'm setting up a new drum set that we just got here for my videos at Drumeo. And so it's a Pearl Masters BCX kit. So excited to play it, and I wanted to show you guys like my first setup of it, kind of figuring out exactly where I'm going to put things. It's a little bit different than some of the setups you've seen on my other videos, and it's a little more relatable because I'm just going to use cymbal stands and not a big rack system. I've only got 6 drums instead of 7 or 8 or more than that. And so let's get started on that. First things first, you want to get your kick drum set up where you want your kick drum. For most people, it's pretty just obvious where it goes. It goes right in front of you. Some people tilt it to the side a little bit. Lately, I've been playing it straightforward. At one point, I did have it a little bit tilted, but for now and for what we're doing here, got it straightforward. So get your throne set up, get your kick drum set up, and once that feels a little comfortable there, we can pull out the pedals, because your hi-hat and your snare drum stand all have to work around the pedals. And so I'm going to go ahead and get those situated. All right, feel pretty good about that. Now once I get the snare drum and the hi-hat stand in here, I may adjust it a little bit. Instantly from the top view, you'll notice that I have a really wide stance on my pedals. And this is something that most people don't have. A lot of people would have their double pedal on the inside here and closer to the kick drum. And so right away you'll see that I have a little bit wider stance. I have really long legs and really long arms and a very tall and lanky body. And so some of these things might not work for someone with shorter legs or shorter arms, but for me, this is really comfortable. It allows me to keep this area open for the snare drum, and it allows me to keep my legs at a comfortable, like this isn't so like natural for me. Like a little more open is more natural. So next step is the hi-hat. Well, actually, sometimes I do the hi-hat, sometimes I do the snare drum. Since it's my first setup, I'm gonna put the snare drum next. Now this is a little bit of a balancing act here, trying to like perfectly figure out where it can go. And so I like it closer to me. So I'm going to try it on this side of the double kick pedal first. Put it right there. Gonna watch the kick drum there. This is one of the most difficult things about setting a snare drum kind of low, is trying not to hit the actual kick. So got that situated. Just tightening up the snare holster here so it can, the basket, so it can grab hold of that snare drum and keep it nice and tight. Don't want it going anywhere, especially when you play it hard like I do. And now we've got a little more leeway on the kick drum there, so we can adjust that. All right, now that feels pretty good right away. It's about level with my legs, and some people think that's pretty low. This is actually a little higher than I sometimes play it. Sometimes it's a little lower than that. And then I keep it relatively flat because I do a lot of rim shots. Like my primary snare hit is a rim shot when I'm playing some heavy stuff. Now, those are 2 of your most important pieces, because in your playing, your kick drum is extremely important and your snare drum is extremely important. So you want the relationship there to be what you need it to be, whatever feels really natural. And so next, we've got the hi-hat stand. So this is the last really, really important piece in terms of your core setup. And this is something that you really want to spend some time on perfecting, because you want these three things to just be so natural. Just trying to adjust the pedals so that I've got the room I need. I'm going to have to adjust the bottom of the snare here so there's room for the hi-hat pedal to come through. All right, so now I've got my three pedals situated, and if you see, I've got plenty of room between all of them for my knees to go and for my feet to move between them and not have any issues hitting anything. And so that just really allows freedom of movement and quickness of transition there, because if you're playing the hi-hat and you want to move over to the kick drum there, you want to be able to move cleanly between the two without a lot of distance change, because that allows you to be faster. And throughout my setup, you'll notice that everything is very close together oftentimes, and that allows me to minimize the amount of effort and time between the actual drums. Now, it's funny I say effort because I play with a lot of aggression and energy, so I do expel a lot of effort, but I don't want to have my drums hold me back from playing. I don't want to have to reach way over here for my rack tom. I want it to be right where I want it. And so you'll see that in a few seconds. Now we're going to get some hi-hats out and make sure that they fit on here. Right away, I noticed that it's going to cover up a little more of the snare drum than I want, so I'm going to have to make some adjustments in here to get the area and the transition between them that I'd like. So you also notice right away that my hi-hats, I just lowered them a lot. And people ask me all the time, why is it that I keep my hi-hats that low? And there's definitely reasoning behind it, and that's because I love to not have a large gap or a large movement between these two. These are two of your core pieces. Besides the kick drum, for your hands, these are where like almost everything can happen. I could take this drum set to a gig and I could play just with this kit right here. And that's kind of the mentality you need to have when setting up these three pieces, is that everything you do in this area is formulated to work the best for you. And so I'm not going to do it today. I'm not going to take 35 minutes to exact every single piece of it. I might have some time before my live lesson later where I do that. But for now, I'm going to try and show you guys quickly how I get it to work the way that I like it. But that right there is a pretty good evaluation, a good example of how I set these three up. The hi-hat just covers up a slight bit of the left side of the snare drum. The kick pedal's on the outside for easy access and allowed me to have that wide stance. And then the snare drum is pretty close to me, not too close, because I like to have some room in between here so I don't hit myself with the stick too much. But I do, when I play, rest my hand on my leg a lot of times when I'm not playing something on the snare drum. And so that allows me to do that. And this is actually pretty awesome right here for me and for how I'm going to do it. I'm going to raise my throne just a little bit. And that's another important thing to adjust, is your throne to where you really feel the need. And so now the snare drum feels a little bit lower to me, a little more in my comfort zone, because that's where my arm naturally falls. People ask why my snare drum is so low, and it's because that's where my arm naturally falls. It's weird for me to like lift my arm up to play the snare drum. I want my arm to be where it feels like it should be, and that's right there, allowing me that perfect, like this is where my arm kind of hangs, and I can play that snare drum all day, just like that. So after this, You can kind of go multiple directions with what you want to put next, but for me, I like to position the toms because I really want those to be accessible as well. So on this kit setup, we have a bass drum with the actual, put these on backwards, with the clamps in it so that you can put your toms directly on the kick. And some people like that, some people don't like that. Some people say for sound that it's better not to have it. I personally don't notice a huge difference, and I think on a non-rack system, it's really, really convenient to have that. And a lot of entry-level kits come with it, and so that's what we're gonna do today is have this set up here. Even though this isn't an entry-level kit, we do want it to have that convenience of not having to mount them off of a cymbal stand. Now, one of the first things that I immediately focus on is not hitting the actual bass drum with the tom. And so I'm going to raise this up just a little bit to ensure that it doesn't happen. Give it a little bit of breathing room there. That's one thing I like about my setups. Oftentimes they have shallow depth toms. These are not really, really deep toms, and so they allow you to mount them a little bit lower over the drum. And try not to do that. All right, so now I've got an easy reach between all of these drums. There's nothing that, these aren't here yet, but there's not a long reach between any of these. And so some people have them mounted further away, and I have the arm length to mount them further away. Like, I could put a drum right there and it wouldn't be too much for me to get to. But if you notice, I barely have to move my arms at all to access these. So it allows me to be more fluid, more open, and just allow me to move more easily between the drums, no matter what it is that I'm playing and no matter how I'm playing it. And I put a little bit of tilt on the drums themselves so that I can get over the rims a little bit easier and access them a little bit better. But I don't like them really tilted because I like the ability to hit them with the stroke coming down at them and not at a slant on them as much. So those are those two. Bring up the floor toms real quick. Now, one thing I like to do with the drums here is I like to have almost levels. And so what I mean by that is that I'm going to put these floor toms definitely on the exact same level together. I don't want any sort of change in level between them so that my hand can move freely between the two. And then sometimes I try and get them basically on the same level as the snare drum, depending on how deep the snare drum is. If it's a shallower snare, sometimes it's easier to do that. These are going to be a little bit lower than the snare drum because this is a 5.5-inch snare instead of a 4.5-inch. Well, 5.5 inches is generally a normal snare, but I've been playing with a 5-inch Chad Smith signature that allows for a little bit lower mounting. Same thing with the floor toms here. Go with a little bit of a slant. That way I can access them a little easier, but still want basically almost flat level here to where it's got that attack where it's almost coming straight down onto the drum. All right, so now I've got quick between everything. Nothing is too far away, nothing is inaccessible because of distance. It's all very close together, and you can use very flowing motions between the two. Like if anyone played tenors or quads in high school or college, you know you've got that scrape motion, and that's something that I don't do a lot, but you can actually do it on these drums because of the way they're set up. And that just allows you to really flow between the drums nicely. So that is your main structure there. Now your cymbals, of course, are very important in your placement as well so that you can access them the way that you'd like to access them. But in terms of cymbals, they're big. A lot of times they're big. Some use smaller cymbals. But for me, I use big cymbals. And so their placement isn't as necessarily mathematical like these are. Like I really spend time creating an exact setup for these, but the cymbals are more accessible from different locations. And so I'm going to do a 4-cymbal setup right now for my Drumeo videos, and for later I'm going to show off some New Zildjian cymbals, and I'm going to do a little bit bigger of a setup. But I wanted to do something that's really relatable to you guys. A lot of you have 2 crashes, a ride, and hats. And so that's something that I use when I play at churches and something that I use when I play a lot of gigs. And so I wanted to showcase that with these cymbals. So let's get started there. Your second most important cymbal, in my opinion, is your ride, especially if you have a crashable ride, which is something that I definitely have. So I've got a huge 23-inch Sweet ride, which means some of you will have more like a 20-inch ride or a 21-inch ride, and you won't have as much ride to deal with. But for me, it's a big old ride, and so I'm going to put it a little bit further away than I would a smaller ride, because I don't want to cover up the toms. And when I have a Sweet ride and a ride that I really want to crash on, I'll put it higher. And this is a ride that I will crash. So it's got a great wash to it. And so, I'm going to fall down there. I give it a little bit of breathing room between the actual ride and the toms. Now, if I were doing a non-crashable ride, or one that I'm just going to play the top of and just the bell, I would actually do a much lower mount and a little closer. So without crashing it, this is probably where I'd place the ride, because then it's easier to access. It's on the same level as the hats, which is, like I said before, those levels. And so you can get across it and actually play it easier without having to lift your hand up more to play the bell and to play the top of the ride. It's very fluid. And there's not much motion to it in order to get to it. You don't have to lift up to play. You just kind of come straight across, and it's natural. You got that. Almost easy access, I guess, is the best way to put it. But since I do want to be able to crash it, I'm going to raise it up a little bit, put it back a little bit, and now we've got a ton of accessibility to the actual crash without hitting the floor tom, without hitting anything like that. So you can move between it. And everything flows well. Then last thing is your crashes. You can be really particular about their placement. I'm just going to go straight stand with both of them, because not everyone has boom cymbal stands. And when I use the 4-cymbal setup, I usually do just use straight cymbal stands. And sometimes I like to do one in front, or actually both in front, right side and left side. And that's probably what I'll end up doing with a larger cymbal setup. But in this setup, I like to have, since I have the crash of that crash ride right there, I can have the crashes on opposite corners, so I can end a fill like back there, and I don't have to come back to the front to end a fill. And I can also crash out here. And then big cymbal hits are still accessible. And that's also because of the big cymbals that I have for this as well. It's a 20-inch thin crash. So 20 inches is pretty big for a crash cymbal. It's kind of, I'd say, like the go-to in terms of the biggest crash that most people use is about a 20. And then from my front, I've got an 18-inch medium thin. So in both of those scenarios, pretty big cymbals, easy to get to. And one thing I like to do with these is I keep them pretty low all together, but I do try and keep them both on the exact same level as well. And it's not like I don't get a level out and make sure it's perfect, but I do try and keep them pretty similar. It's probably, to me, more of a look than it is like a necessity to play, because I could play the crash there, I could play the crash there, I could play the crash there, and it still works. But I enjoy my setups looking nice as well. And so from here, I keep it backed away a little bit. That way, because when it's all up on you, you're having to hit it with like more of a weird stroke. When it's there, you've got more of the wash, the flowing, glancing motion to it, to where you can play it without such attack. And a lot of people break cymbals because they come at the cymbal with such a violent and straight-on hit. And when you do a glancing hit, there's a lot more ability to protect the actual cymbal. So when you play it, one thing you should do when you set up your kick pedals is tighten the beater, or else it will fall out on you while you're playing. But thankfully, we're not in a live setup here, so that is another thing when you're setting up a drum set you should probably do. You should definitely do. But that is the overall kind of idea behind the way I set up things. A lot of times for extra cymbals, if you have the option, I'll do a cool accessory here. Like I have the spiral stacker from Zildjian, a really cool one that bounces. I'm going to put that right there probably. And then oftentimes I'll have an extra splash or something for left-hand accents over here, or a Zill bell on the right-hand side. But as far as a very simple cymbal setup, this is kind of the exact thing there. And so when you look at this setup, everything's close, everything's within reach, nothing is too difficult to get to, even with long arms. Like I could put a cymbal way over here and it wouldn't be that much of an issue. Boom, boom. But I do want things to be close, and that shows with the snare drum, the level that it's at, the hi-hat, and everything just being within reach. So that is the setup here. That is everything that I like to do to really focus and get the drums where I want them within reach and be able to play them. There's still a little fine tuning to do, and that's something that you can do on your own kit. Once you get the general idea, you may want to adjust it half an inch over here and really find the science behind your playing. And that's really the focus of this idea and this lesson, is to figure out what it is that works best for you and show you what works really well for me. So now, if you want to hear this really awesome drum set recorded and some cool lessons and videos and stuff, all you got to do is click the link at the top of my description and send me your email, and I'm going to send you emails every time I put out new stuff. I've got new covers coming, I've got all sorts of new lessons, I've got 5-part series, and I'm just going to keep you up to date on what I'm doing, and also a ton of awesome opportunities to show you how great this drum set sounds and looks, and just have a lot of fun playing drums, guys. Thanks so much for tuning in, and make sure you sign up with your email, and I'll be talking to you soon. Have a good one.